She asked it like a child asking for the moon, small, earnest. "Can you be my mom?" The question landed in the diner's late-night hum like a stone into still water. If you believe in kindness and second chances, if the idea that one small question can reroute a life moves you, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Around Us, because this story lives in the quiet places where ordinary people decide to be brave. Maya was 8 by looks, maybe, though there was an oldness in her eyes that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with the work of waiting. She smelled faintly of rain and lemon soap and carried a paper bag like a small universe, with a well-worn teddy peeking from the folds. The arc of her shoes suggested a childhood made on hard sidewalks and hand-me-downs. Her sleeves had been rolled to shorten them, the kind of improvisation that carries compassion and shortage in equal measure. Her story came out in careful sentences: nights in borrowed apartments, a mother who had struggled, a father who had left, each fragment delivered without a plea, as if she were testing whether the world still kept room for somebody small and unclaimed. There was no dramatics in how she asked, it was simply a child mapping possibility with a single, tender question. Claire had been a waitress for 10 years, the kind of person who remembered regulars' coffee orders and folded napkins like prayer. She had learned how to make a small world feel safer for strangers, stacking plates so they would not clatter, pouring coffee so it cooled just right. Her life with Mark had been simple and taut. He worked construction when the work came, she worked nights at the diner, and they stretched their money. They had wanted children once and had been forced to sell the crib after a miscarriage. Grief lodged in the corners of their apartment like dust. When Maya asked that impossible question at the counter, Claire felt loose and surprised and also, beneath everything, ready in a way she had not expected to be. Mark arrived late that night, rain on his coat and exhaustion on his face, the kind of man who had learned to keep feelings measured because life demanded practical responses. He had been taught that promises without means were cruelty, that the best way to love a family was to ensure the roof did not leak and the bills were paid. When Claire told him about Maya, she did not dramatize, she simply set the facts out like tools on a shelf. He catalogued logistics in his mind, schedules, income, the reality of a system that might not be gentle, and for one long, brittle second it looked like he might say no. Instead he slid his work-hardened hand over Claire's on the diner counter, a small, steadied concession that word alone could not capture, and the two of them began to rearrange their lives around a little person no one had planned for. The days that followed were not cinematic rescues but the slow, stubborn labor of becoming a family. They navigated social services with patience and annoyance, filled out forms that seemed to ask the soul's weight in boxes, and waited for callbacks that sometimes came like tidal ebbs. Claire learned to match daytime naps to her night shifts. She learned to master a child's schedule with a precision she did not know she possessed. Mark took extra shifts and came home smelling of sawdust and rain and learning to help with homework he had never been asked to consider before. Maya's trauma arrived in small fractures. She woke at night, flinched at loud voices, clung tightly when the wind rattled the windows, but slowly, through repetition and safety, she began to let the edges of fear soften. Progress looked like a morning when she ate cereal without crying, an afternoon when she left the house without gripping Claire's hand as if it might vanish. Community stitched itself around them in surprising ways. Regulars from the diner brought clothes and advice. A neighbor left a casserole at the door on freezing nights. Mrs. Patel from the 4th floor began to tuck spices and jars of sweets outside their apartment with unassuming generosity. A baker who closed shop late often dropped a bag of day-old bread. A volunteer tutor took a liking to Maya and began helping with reading after school. Small acts accumulated into a net, the difference between a day that felt precarious and a day they could breathe. There were whispers, too, judgmental comments from people who assumed compassion was naive, but kindness multiplied quietly and without fanfare, until the edges of their need were softened by strangers turned allies. The toughest moment arrived in a courtroom under fluorescent legal light, where the language of care is reduced to inventories and categories. The hearing felt like an exam where every part of their life could be summoned, examined, and found wanting. Chairs were hard, voices were measured, and the judge's questions were clinical and exacting. Mark surprised even himself there. Instead of reciting a rehearsed list of assets, he spoke with startling vulnerability. He admitted fear, about money, about sleepless nights, about failing, and then he named what he would do regardless. He spoke of small, precise promises. He would take every extra shift he could, he would learn what Maya needed even when it humiliated him, he would be present for school nights and hospital appointments. The court had heard polished lines before, it had not always heard a man offer his fear as proof of intent. The judge, listening to that honesty, granted them temporary custody, and the ruling felt less like a final triumph and more like a contract signed by people who had decided to be brave every day. Nothing about their life after that was easy. There were arguments about bills and who would stay home when Maya was sick, nights when Claire cried quietly into a tea mug while Mark sat beside her without a solution. There were practical humiliations, applying for assistance, asking for second-hand bikes, counting pennies at grocery counters, but there were also 100 small mercies, Claire cutting sandwiches into the triangles Maya liked, Mark learning to tie shoes and braid hair with clumsy, careful hands, Maya learning to whistle tunelessly while she swept crumbs from the table. Those small things, repeated until they became habit, built a scaffolding that held them through lean months and made a home from the raw materials of patience. One winter night crystallized the truth of what community and persistence could do. Their heater failed and the apartment chilled to bone. Claire held Maya under quilts while Mark checked the fuse box until his fingers went numb. A knock came late, and Mrs. Patel stood in the hallway with a casserole and an envelope tucked inside a note that read simply, "For tonight." She refused thanks and patted Maya's hair like an elder sealing an unspoken benediction. The neighbor's act was a tiny cathedral of care. It did not fix every problem, but it kept them from falling that night. In the days after, other offers, free tutoring, leftover bread, a donated coat, accumulated into ordinary rescue. The city that had once felt indifferent became, in small increments, a circle of hands. Years later, the photographs that decorated their mantle, sunburned faces at a fair, a crooked clay heart on the refrigerator, a tiny hand holding Claire's finger, would not be proof of a perfect life but of an ordinary, stubborn survival. Maya would write a crooked letter to the agency that had kept her in limbo, thanking them for the work they did while insisting she had been lucky to find a messy, loving home. People would ask Claire and Mark how they managed, and their answer would always be the same: they asked for help when they needed it, they refused to hide fear, and they chose each other more often than they chose ease. The miracle was not a singular event but the repetition of small decisions that added up to steady safety. Special request: before you finish watching, please comment with one small kindness you can do this week, and the name of someone who deserves a second chance. If this story touched your heart, if Maya's simple question and Mark's unexpected courage moved something inside you, please engage with the video, like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Around Us. Their lives did not become effortless, but they became full of ordinary, fierce love, which is the kind of miracle worth telling. Always. Ask ChatGPT.